Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Dennis Hursh. He's a healthcare attorney, regular on the podcast by Kevin MD, talking about all things contract. His latest article is What Every Physician Should Know Before Buying into a Medical Practice. Dennis, welcome back to the show.
No, thanks. It's great to be here.
All right, so today we're going to talk about private practice, buying into a medical practice, which affects a relative minority of physicians, a decreasing number of physicians, but still very important because, again, physicians don't get any real training or education when it comes to private practice situations like this. So tell us what this latest article is about.
Well, I think it talks about some of the things that can go wrong when buying into a medical practice. But I think you have to start off with the caveat that the things I'm mentioning are very much outliers. I've done, if not hundreds, certainly many dozens of buy-ins, and I've seen two or three issues where there's really something bad. Generally, if you get the opportunity to buy into a medical practice, it's generally a great deal, and it almost always works out great for the physician.
All right. So before going into some of these outlier situations, like I mentioned before, a lot of physicians aren't familiar with the whole concept of buying into a medical practice. So just give us some context and potential common scenarios that something like this would typically arise.
Well, a typical one is you leave training, you go to work for a practice as an employee, just like you'd be an employee of a hospital. But usually your employment contract should say something about being considered for partnership in so many years. And hopefully it'll give the criteria that they'll use and the methodology for buying in. So let's say it's 3 years, about 2.5 years into your thing, they come to you and say, hey, you're doing great. We really like your practice. We'd
Mhm.
like to make you a partner. And here's the documents that you're going to need to sign to become a partner.
And tell us the pros and cons of becoming a partner in a private practice.
In my mind, it's almost all pros. The idea is usually as an employed physician, you get a salary, you may get a productivity bonus, but if we have labs, maybe an x-ray, all of that, we're making money from that and we're not sharing it with you generally.
Mhm.
So generally the practice is doing well. A lot of times the partners own the real estate and they're leasing it to the practice. Maybe it's fair market value, maybe it isn't. It's a good deal for the owners. So it's almost always pros. The cons are, and I say it as a con, but I'm not sure it's that much of one, is you're going to definitely be in an eat what you treat situation. Ultimately, the partners get paid after everybody else gets paid, and usually they get the biggest chunk. I say it's not that much of a con because if the practice is losing money and we're losing patients, guess who the first to go is? It's going to be the employed physician. So
Mhm.
I'm not sure that's that much of a negative.
And in terms of the typical amount one needs to buy in, give us some common scenarios in terms of what kind of dollar amounts are we talking about?
All over the board. I've seen some where $100 you come in and it's a really valuable practice that has valuable assets and $100 and you join the club, which I actually kind of scares me a little bit. I've been in situations where medical practices just split apart because a private equity group will come in or the hospital come in and say, hey, we want to buy you out. So if you're 30 years old and starting your career, you're probably saying, "Hey, I'm making a ton of money. I like being in charge. I'm not going to do it." But if I'm 60 years old and getting near the end of my practice and I have a hospital going to pay me six figures or more or for my share of the practice, but you guys are going to give me $100, it's going to be some real tension there. So most of them have something around a methodology. I'd say the most common is a methodology where you buy into not the fair market value, the book value of the assets. I do see some fair market value deals, but I more book value, which is just, if we bought whatever it's showing on our books, if we paid $100,000 for that X-ray machine 5 years ago, it may be depreciated down to nothing, but that new gizmo we bought is going to be on the books at its price. If you're a 1/5 owner, you're going to pay a fifth of that. A lot of times you'll also buy into the receivables, but sometimes they'll say you don't have any right to receivables that were generated before. You become a partner July 1. Anything up to June 30th, you don't have a right to the receivables. The existing partners are going to take those receivables and then you share in anything after that. So, I mean, there's a huge variety of the buy-ins. I had one very recently where somebody feels her solo practice is worth $6 million, and which I think is crazy, but so it's all across the board.
All right. So talk to some of these new physicians who may be listening to you, and maybe they've been employed in a private practice for a couple of years and now they get this offer to potentially buy in. And again, they don't know where to turn to as
Mhm.
to whether this is a good deal or not. Tell us the steps that one would go through to evaluate a proposed buy-in.
Well, one of the things is you have to look at you want to see the governance documents. That may be bylaws for a corporation, or maybe an operating agreement for an LLC. Most of the time, if you're coming in, there's five of us and we're bringing you in, most of the time, you're going to have 1/6 of the vote. You're going to own 1/6 of the practice. Everything is going to be majority rule, and that's it. We may have super majority for some things. Maybe we need, 5/6 to bring in a new partner or something. But that's the general case. You come in, you're either a shareholder or you're a member, you're an owner, and you have equal votes with everybody else. That's the most common. I've actually seen one where it was a 5-person group and the founding shareholder had 20% of the stock, as you would expect in a 5-person group, but he had a 51% vote in any decision. So basically, this is the way I want it to be. You don't like it? Well, let's take a vote. Before we do, 51% went for it. Everything's majority rule. So again, that's really weird, but you just want to make sure if that you're coming in basically as an equal. I've seen classes of owners. Radiology practices are notorious for this, but to a lesser extent, sometimes oncology practices too, where you've got founding members or founding partners, you've got senior partners, which is kind of not quite the same profit share, not quite the same votes. And then you've got junior partners, which is you. And if you look at it, you're basically just still an employee. You don't have much say in anything. You don't have a very good share of the profits. It's almost like now your guaranteed income is taken away and it's eat what you treat, but you don't get too many benefits of ownership. So you need to look at that. Again, looking at governance, if it's a 4, 5, 6-person group, usually everybody is going to be on the board of directors. So all the decisions are going to be made jointly, and including your first day as a shareholder. If it's a huge group, if there's 50 owners, obviously 50 people don't need to crowd into the room for every decision. So on a larger group, a lot of times they'll have a smaller cadre that's the board of directors or the managing members or something like that. And that's completely reasonable. But you want to make sure that certain things are a super majority, like bringing in a new partner should be a super majority. It shouldn't be half of us say this, or the 4 people on the board decide if a new partner comes in. I mean, that's the kind of thing that everybody should have a say in. And I think one of the other things is you want to look at the how you're bought out. And hopefully it's the same way that you bought in. If we say you're getting book value for your shares is what you're paying, that's what you should get when you go out too. And weirdly, I've seen some where people are paying a lot of money to come in
Mhm.
and then a reduced amount when they leave, which again is very rare, but it's just something you want to make sure that coming in costs the same as what you're going to get going out. And I think really fine point. But another thing I look at is if you're paying for your shares over time, for over 5 years, you're going to buy 5 shares. Most places, I think you should get 5 votes on day one, even though you're not completely paid for the shares. And it's reasonable for them to take a security interest, say, look, we're holding the shares until you pay for them. But I've seen some where you've got a 5-year buy-in and we hold the shares as a security interest
Mhm.
for 5 years. So it should be, security interest released as you're paying off the shares.
So In a typical scenario, one will work as an employee for a couple years before they're offered the details of the buy-in. Now, in most cases, are they aware of some of the issues that you're talking about, the governance and whatnot during that employed period?
No, no. I mean, you report to somebody who tells you this is what we're doing. Hey, we're opening a new office, across town. Okay. Yeah, no, you're not involved, and you probably don't know how the decision was made. I mean, hopefully, if it's, if it's a dysfunctional practice, then sure, Joe comes in and says, Cindy insisted on this, and she got Fred and Sue to go with her, but hopefully that's not the case. It's generally, a united front.
Hmm.
And it's just like working at a hospital. They tell you this is what we're doing, and that's how it goes.
So what if you've already invested a few years in a private practice and they come to you with a partnership offer and you don't like some of the things that you talk about, the governance structure is not favorable and some of these red flags are raised when they offer you to be partner.
Yeah, I usually ask when somebody's joining a private practice, I ask to see the shareholders agreement then because, and some of the governance documents, just so you don't get that nasty surprise. You invest 3 years of your life and you find that you're a partner in name only. So I usually ask for it. You don't always get it, and it's kind of and I also ask sometimes for financial information on the practice. But if you think about it, it is kind of a big ask. It's like you're coming in, you don't even work for me yet, and you want to know what I make. You want to know how sometimes they do push back and it's tough to get. But I always ask for the governance documents and the shareholder agreement as part of the buy-in.
So if they don't give you that information and you begin to work for a private practice, are you just going on faith that eventually when they do offer you partnership, it's
No, I
somewhat
keep
favorable?
an ask. I mean, I'd rather see the document,
Okay.
but I think it's safe to say, well, how does, if I become a partner, do I have an equal vote? Is there anything weird with the voting? Am I going to be the same as everybody else? So, they can lie to you, but that's probably the least of your problems. If they're lying to you, becoming a shareholder probably isn't going to be of interest anyway, once you deal with those people.
All right. So tell us about some of these outlier situations, some of the stories that you've heard.
Well, I mentioned the one where the bylaws said that the founding member had 50, everything was
Oh,
done
yeah.
by majority rule, and he had 51% in the founding member. I've also had, and the different classes, I also had a case where we came in and we asked to see the financials and we're looking at it, and this was many years ago, and it was something like eight or $900,000 line of credit. And I asked what the line of credit was for. And they said, oh, reimbursement dropped, things were getting tight, our expenses were going up, but we're kind of used to making what we were making. So we just borrowed the money from the bank and paid ourselves. So now we owe all this money to the bank. And guess what? When you come in as a new shareholder, you're going to take a portion of that. I mean, that sets up red flags in a lot of ways. One, why are you taking debt that was used just to pay my salary is one, but two, why are you buying into a practice that can't pay its shareholders what apparently they could make if they work someplace else? So that raised a whole host of red flags. And I think those are the biggest things, not being treated fairly and just bad financial situation in the practice.
So you mentioned earlier that the majority of buy-in offers are generally favorable to the physician. So it's fair to say that they should obtain some counsel in terms of evaluating the contract first when they join the practice and again when they are offered the buy-in. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, I mean obviously I'm biased. That's what
Yeah.
I do, but yeah, I think of what would have happened to these
Mm.
clients if they had just signed it and then learned later. I think it would have been a pretty nasty surprise.
What are some typical negotiation points that you can discuss during the buy-in process?
Well, a lot of it, the biggest thing is you're going to get probably a new employment agreement. And the biggest thing is this exactly the same as what everybody else signed? I mean, if I'm signing an employment agreement that says I get 3 weeks of vacation, I assume that even though you've been there 30 years, but you're getting 3 weeks of vacation too. Or if it says something like you get X number of weeks until you've worked there this long or something like that. But the biggest thing is, hey, if I'm an owner, I expect to be treated like an owner. I expect to be treated the same as the other partners. So I think that's something that you definitely want to look at. Other things you see, and again, I usually don't talk too much about the shareholders agreement because if everybody signed it, unless there's something just glaring, hey,
Yeah.
this is really scary. If everybody signed it, they're not going to negotiate it, unless it's a glaring mistake and everybody says, I didn't notice that. We should change it. Just happened once in my career. But so I think those are the things looking at it. You're going to get a purchase agreement and you want to know how that purchase price was done. I mean, I've had people say it's $100,000 because about 8 years ago we had the practice evaluated and they said it was worth, X and it was worth $1 million and you're going to be a 10th owner. So that's not too reassuring. At 10 years ago, that's what this practice was worth. So, and as I said, it's important that however the price of your buy-in is calculated, the price of your buyout has to be the same. So again, looking at the financial stability of the practice and just trying to see, I mean, if I can go work at the hospital for $200,000 a year, if the shareholders are making $200,000 a year and I've got to pay $400,000 to become a shareholder, that doesn't make sense. The presumption is that I'm going to buy in and it's a good investment for me. And
Hmm.
as a shareholder, I will make enough money to get that investment back. Hopefully usually many times over, but that's the kind of thing you need to look at, I think.
We're talking to Dennis Hursh. He's a healthcare attorney. Today's Kevin MD article is What Every Physician Should Know Before Buying into a Medical Practice. Dennis, let's end with some take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is if you're becoming employed by a private practice, you should try and find out everything you can about what's going to happen when I become a shareholder. And I think the second thing is if you're offered a buy-in, just look at it. Don't go for the title. This is great. I'm going to be a partner. Look at, does it make financial sense? Will I make more? Will I get my investment back? Will I be treated fairly?
Dennis, as always, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. And thanks again for coming back on the show.
Sure, it's my pleasure. Thank you.